Hello, Susan Flory with you, back with The Big Middle, another episode for you. I know I've been MIA. I've just been so busy with a surprise surge of client work. And after the drought that happened during the pandemic, I'm, of course, taking any and all queries. And if you want to know what that's all about, head to my website, susanflory.com, and you'll see a work with me section there. So if I can help you, feel free, get in touch. What have I got for you now? A skin cancer update, my skin cancer update. Regulars will know I put out a couple of podcasts 18 months ago when all of this was happening. And I have to report that I had 2 wide local excision operations to cut out a malignant melanoma. And I'm happy to report that the scar, I won't bother showing it to you, but you can barely see it. It's faded so much. And at the time it was, Pac-Man shark bite territory. And I thought, oh my God, this will never calm down, but it surely has. And owing to the expertise of the amazing surgical team I had at Charing Cross Hospital here in London, the National Health Service comes in for a lot of stick. It's been the victim of years of austerity. And then we had Brexit and then the pandemic, and there's a massive backlog, but I cannot rave about it enough. I was swept in and really dealt with beautifully. So hats off to everyone who took care of me and continues to take care of me. A couple of weeks ago, I went back to the hospital to check out some new patch of strange on the other leg. It was worrying. And the skin cancer nurse, she just said, oh, don't worry, it's nothing. So big whew. But again, it's really important. You check your skin out. Check it once a month, which is the advice you'll hear in this podcast. Even if you haven't been baking on beaches and not slathering on that sunscreen, as you know you should. Here we go. This is The Big Middle, the show about living longer, aging differently, expecting more in the bigger middle. I'm Susan Flory. 1 in 2 of us will get cancer in our lifetime. It's only a matter of what kind and when. You've no doubt heard that. I wouldn't say that I have morbidly dwelled on that grim reality in recent weeks, but I have had cause to consider it anew. You see, a skin cancer specialist has declared that this flat brown blob that suddenly appeared on my outer lower leg around 6 weeks ago is likely a malignant melanoma, which is, as you know, the deadliest form of skin cancer. I asked him, of course, how likely. Instantly, he said, 80% likely. So I've got excision biopsy surgery booked for a few days from now. And I still can't quite believe it, and friends and family can't quite believe it either, but, I've got them all checking themselves. Now, I am that whiter shade of pale, green-eyed Irish, prone to sunburn. I have been careful in the sun as an adult. I've slathered on the SPF high, at least 30 factor skin cream. Sunscreen rather, but that was not the case in my teens. Every summer day in my teens was spent swimming, slathering on baby oil, baking ourselves, me and my pals, to a golden crisp on all the sandy beaches in my hometown, which is Sarnia, Ontario, of course, Canada. And this town, Sarnia, is at the southernmost tip of Lake Huron on the American border. And it's roughly the same latitude as New York City. So eggs are fried, fast fried on sidewalks in the summer. It gets that hot. On this episode of the show, the why and the what of melanoma, we'll be getting into diagnosis, treatment, prognosis. Back on the podcast with her skin cancer specialist, Chloe Kahn, your favorite and mine, dermatologist Dr. Fayne Frey. She's the founder of Freyface.com, that brilliant skincare education hub that we explored in episode 49. You'll want to be checking that out. Hello, Fayne.
Hello, Susan, and thank you for having me back on The Big Middle.
I'm just so grateful that you're available because this, as I say, arrived out of the blue and it's hugely personal. I think, let's face it, this is a public service podcast because we all need to know a heck of a lot more about this. So I'm, of course, rattled by the specialist's 80% malignancy declaration about my brown splotch. Is this, would you say, knowing now that we baked ourselves in coconut oil or baby oil as kids and teenagers, we didn't know any better. Is this the bill coming due?
Yes, first, I'm very sorry that you have to go through this, but do be optimistic because you're not absolutely sure it's melanoma. And also, I would advise that you get your good care, which hopefully you're doing. Yes, you can't do much about the history of our sun exposure in our generation and those older than us. We all got sun. When I was a child, there really was no sunscreen. I believe it was more of a tanning oil. I remember sitting in front of a reflector. I'm watching my sister in front of a reflector, actually looking for those rays. So we can't look back. We have to look forward and know how to look forward so that if something should develop, and how to prevent, if getting the melanoma, at least finding it and getting early attention to it.
In these days where more of us are aware of the ultraviolet rays that can cause DNA damage to our skin, are you finding I mean, you're a skin cancer specialist. This is your bread and butter daily, and fry face is something else you do. But people in your clinic, do you find they're coming in with these melanomas, which may or may not be malignant, and the other kinds of cancer, which you're going to lay out for us, in their 50s and their 60s? It's all the childhood damage from 0 through 18, more or less?
Yes, I see most of the skin cancer patients I see are older patients. But don't be, kid yourself. We have 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds who also have come in, especially those who spend a great deal of time in tanning booths. Young women have come in, again, with a history of tanning booth addicts, I call them. And it doesn't take much exposure. It's 5 sunburns, it doubles your risk of melanoma. So says the Skin Cancer Foundation. So again, it's not just getting older. Anybody can get skin cancer.
I was a year and a half living with my family recently in Cape Town, and I was loosey-goosey with the sun cream. I would always put it on face and neck, but we were jumping in and out of the pool, and you have these beautiful braais, the barbecues, sprawling house parties, in and out of the pool, and I don't really see many adults putting the sunscreen on. The little kids, yes, protect them to the max. We're all very aware, but as the wine flows and everybody gets a little tipsy, you're jumping in and out of the pool. As adults, we don't take enough care. Would you agree?
Is I think a lot of people have that feeling that the damage was done, so they may not need to put it on, which is erroneous. They should put it on. Also, most people, when they put it on, they don't put it on adequately. So sunscreen use in and of itself is very important, but putting it on appropriately is also important. Use of sunscreen is excellent.
We're going to do a second show on prevention essentials and the
Okay.
various sunscreens and all of that. So let's get back to melanoma. Is it more or less common, would you say, than the other main types of skin cancer?
It's much less common, but it's potentially more deadly. It's probably less 5% of all skin cancers. But keep in mind, and there are millions of basal cells, which is another type of skin cancer in the United States. It makes up about 75% of all skin cancers. And then you have the squamous cell, which is probably another 15%. So fortunately, melanoma is the rarer type, but unfortunately, it could be the more aggressive type.
It's aggressivity, and what do the roots, are they deeper, longer? Basal cell, is that more superficial? Lay out all of the defining characteristics of these
Okay,
different cancers, if you will.
the skin is 3 layers. Most people realize the top layer is the layer we see. It's called the epidermis. And all 3 of these cancers originate in the epidermis. The very bottom of the epidermis is called the basal layer. These are the cells that replicate and become the cells above the basal layer. When the cancer starts in the basal layer, in a basal cell, we call it a basal cell carcinoma. The cells that rise to the top of the epidermis are called squamous cells. If a cancer is derived from those, we call it a squamous cell carcinoma. Now, within the basal layer, about every 10th cell is a pigment producing cell called a melanocyte. And if the cancer develops from that, it is called a melanoma, which is why most melanomas are brown or black, because they're pigment producing. And then how well somebody does depends on how extensive the cancer grows. Melanomas tend to be more aggressive.
So with what speed? My blob arrived roughly 6 weeks ago, overnight. It wasn't there the day before, and then boomla, there is this splotch. And I'll post a picture in the show notes of it because it's the kind of thing you can't miss it. And I feel incredibly lucky, as you know, and as regular listeners will know. I lost the love of my life to rampaging malignant melanoma that started with a mole at the base of his spine, and he was only 41. And of course, we didn't notice it, and it had galloped up his spine. He died after 6 horrible months. So I'm relatively lucky. I'm comparatively lucky. The blob that I have, you can't miss it. But if it had been on my back, I wouldn't have noticed it.
Yeah, finding them is important, and we should speak about that too. What we can do again to find them. But you asked a good question: how fast do melanomas grow? And it varies, and nobody really knows the exact rate. There are different kinds of melanomas. So the most common kind of melanoma is called a superficial spreading melanoma, and when it grows, it tends to grow laterally, wide, before it grows down. That's the majority of melanomas. There are nodular melanomas, which grow down. They have a vertical phase, and they can grow rather quickly. There's lentigo malignant melanomas. These are more commonly found in older people, and they can sit for months to years before they cause any trouble. So the growth of a melanoma really depends on the pathology of the melanoma itself. Because you
Well,
asked
you've
how.
looked at my photos, and unfortunately, they're only taken from my iPhone, and so hard for you to discern. But would you say, without examining and feeling for any lumpiness or getting a sense of the depth, would you say it's a superficial spreader?
There is absolutely no way for me to tell because the resolution on the photo was not clear enough for me to tell,
Yeah,
unfortunately. So
yeah.
I could not give you an opinion.
I mean, it doesn't feel bumpy or anything. So, but whatever. In times of medical crisis and in times of crisis in general, my inner calm just comes to the fore. And this is just something I have to deal with and aren't, again, counting my blessings because, I've spotted it. It was hard to miss. So at least I've got a leg up there. And also, I read online because for the first week, I just went, whew, that's weird. And I didn't really think about it. And then after about a week, I thought, better do some superficial doctor Googling and figure this out. And then made an appointment with the GP. And the GP took one look at it and said, no, I'm going to get you in the system. You're going to see a specialist. I dug around, and what I read was on men, because their chest and their back are more exposed, you see roofers in the midday sun, broiling in the sun, and you see a lot of men at the beach, of course, they never put a shirt on, and they get it on their chest and their back. And for women, I was quite surprised. The locality is the lower legs.
Lower legs.
Why is
I,
that?
that is my experience. I cannot explain why, but that is what statistically does seem to be evident. Now, were you doing self exams? Is that how you found it?
Well, you can't miss it because you've seen it. It's my outer leg. You can't have a shower and not kind of notice the sudden arrival of a big brown splotch. So if it had been on the back of my leg, or let's say in the folds of the underside of my knee or my
Right.
back, I wouldn't have noticed. Its high vis nature has given me cause to be quite hopeful.
Yes, because if you can find it early, then your prognosis will be much better. Well,
How
like I
else
said,
can it manifest as an age spot at first or a tiny pinprick mole? Take us through some of that.
yes, it might appear like a mole, healthy mole. We again, depending on the type, most of them, fortunately, are pigmented. They will be brown, black. So the system that is evolved is called the ABCDE system, and it's a mnemonic for 5 different criteria. So A being asymmetry. When you look at a mole, it should be symmetric. You should be able to take a pencil or a piece of paper or draw a line, if you will, through the half of the mole, and one half of the mole should look like the other half of the mole. Now, I should say if any one of these criteria is not met, that does not mean it's a melanoma. It just means it should be looked at by somebody who's an expert. So A stands for asymmetry. B is border. A border of a healthy mole is smooth. The distinction between the mole and the normal skin is clear and easy to see. When the borders become notched or blurry, that is an unhealthy sign. C is color. Healthy moles like to be light brown or dark brown, all the same color. When you start seeing multiple colors, light browns, dark browns, sometimes red, sometimes black, sometimes white, a flag should be raised. D is diameter. So the diameter should be about 5 to 6 millimeters. That is the size of the back of a pencil eraser. Healthy moles are they're usually small. When you start getting larger moles, again, bring it to someone's attention. And E, I say, is evolving or elevated, anything changing in size, shape, or color of any mole. Bring it to someone's attention. These are the criteria we use to teach people, our patients, to actually look at their skin. and do those monthly self exams. But these are the criteria you would use to find a change.
Let's get you to explore the risk factors for melanoma now. Talk us through that, please.
The risk factors, first and foremost, as you had mentioned earlier, is sun exposure. Sun exposure is radiation, and radiation, we know, is a contributor to all skin cancers, but in particular as well as melanoma. So sun exposure, the radiation of the sun, the ultraviolet rays, and tanning booths as well is a known risk factor to melanoma. You talked about your beautiful white Irish skin. Fair-skinned individuals with light hair and light-colored eyes, well, you know they are at much higher risk of getting melanoma. People who have moles, lots of moles, 50 or more moles at a higher risk of getting a melanoma. Anybody with a family history, if you have a first-degree relative, your mom, your dad, sister, brother, or children, if they've had a skin cancer, you are at a higher risk of getting one. And if they've had a melanoma, you are at a higher risk of getting one. So any history of skin cancer as well. Those are the main risk factors. Also, people who are immunocompromised. So infections like HIV, cancer patients who are on chemotherapy, they are also at higher risk. And that's something to just to identify the risk groups in and of themselves. Those are pretty much the risks.
Well, how long would the lag have to be between, because I had this crazy experience, everyone who's listened to the podcast will know, with rheumatoid arthritis, seronegative, at menopause, a couple of autoimmune attacks started. Hashimoto's, which is an antibody attack on your thyroid. And I took these toxic drugs for 2 years for the RA, but I've been off it since 2013, off any of that. So would that be a factor, do you think? Would my immune system, even though I've tried mightily to build it back up, would that be a factor in the arrival of my splotch?
Perhaps, but thyroid disease in and of itself, I don't know of an association between thyroid disease in and of itself. A weakened immune system, yes, but not necessarily.
But I was more focusing not on the Hashimoto's, focusing on my experience for 2 years of, the DMARD protocol, the disease-modifying pharma that is applied to rheumatoid arthritis. I went through the whole thing. So that was major hit to my immune system.
Yes, and if those medications decreased your immune system, perhaps that played a role. But anti-inflammatory medications are not associated, that I'm aware of, with an increased risk of melanoma.
So anyone on prednisone for whatever doesn't really have to be overly concerned.
Well, prednisone does decrease your immune system, but it would have to be long-term. I don't think a short course for poison ivy or a short course of steroid is going to increase your risk. It's a weakened immune system over a period of time.
And
exactly how long, I do not know.
Age is a factor as well.
Yes, age is a factor. Increased age is associated with an increase in all skin cancers, including melanoma.
Most cancers thrive on sugar. We read enough about that. But can a melanoma, such as mine, whether it's malignant or not, I'll discover soon enough, can it begin inside the body and manifest itself externally as a lesion? Or is it always DNA damage, mostly from the sun?
That's an excellent question. So the overwhelming majority of melanomas from the skin are found on the skin. But there are melanomas which are found in other places, for example, behind the eye. So there are pigment cells behind the eye. We call those uveal melanomas. And you wouldn't see that, right? That wouldn't be on the skin. There is a very small number of patients who suffer from melanoma that started from pigment-producing cells internally. Fortunately, that's very rare. And it is unfortunate because you don't know it's happening. You're not able to do a self-exam. You're not able to see it happen. So in actuality, yes, it does happen, but fortunately, it is a rare occurrence compared to the number of skin melanomas that we see.
And when you're examining someone, when you see, you go through the ABCDE and you're looking at a suspicious skin patch and you think, okay, that's looking like it might be melanoma. I mean, the skin cancer specialist at the NHS hospital that saw me a week ago, he brought out what looked like a camera lens. And I mean, what can he see beyond the surface of the skin with that tool?
So that's a very effective diagnostic tool. It's called a dermoscope. And when you look through a dermoscope, you can identify some microstructures, some pigment networks, which are consistent with healthy moles and others that are consistent with not healthy moles. It is not diagnostic. It's a helpful tool to help you sway. For example, somebody who comes in with 50 moles, you don't want to have to biopsy them all, right? So this tool is a helpful guide to help you determine the chances that a particular pigmented growth is healthy or not healthy. Nothing replaces, in my opinion, nothing replaces a biopsy. Nothing replaces removing tissue, putting it on a slide and looking under the microscope and examining the cells. But again, if somebody came in with lots of moles, it would not be practical to remove every one of them. So a suspicious mole and suspicious findings under a dermoscope would help a doctor say, well, geez, I really should biopsy this, or no, I don't need to biopsy this. I can follow this.
Well, what are you seeing that makes it suspicious that they can't be seen by my naked eye?
In the dermoscope, or do you mean this in general?
In the dermoscope or in general? I mean, are you seeing microstructures? What do you see with that lens?
Okay, so in a dermoscope, microstructures, you might see irregular pigment globules or different colors, different asymmetries, different networks of pigment and where they fall. That's a trained eye has to recognize those. Unlike the clinical characteristics that we would teach our lay people, our patients, to look for on their skin. They wouldn't use a dermoscope.
And what about infrared photography or some of the other diagnostic tools that are around? Are those applicable?
Yes, there are many diagnostic tools, and some people like just photographs. They take photographs, and again, a very helpful tool for somebody who has lots of moles. But again, in my opinion, nothing replaces doing a biopsy of a suspicious lesion. And of course, we use those ABCDEs to help teach people how to find those suspicious lesions. I tell my patients, they always ask, well, do I have skin cancer? And how do I know? And I tell them, you don't have to know. What you have to do is you have to find the change. You have to find the thing on you. You know your body better than anybody. You have to be looking to see what it is. And so I teach them those ABCDEs so that they know what to find, so that they know when to seek attention and to seek help from their dermatologist.
Incredibly useful, because I went out with a friend a few days after having the skin cancer specialist book me for the excision biopsy surgery. And she pointed to about 3 things on herself. And they sent up, because I'd been doing some deep digging into all of this. I just went, you must get to your dermatologist immediately. You know, she had something on the side of her nose that was sort of pink, and then it had kind of a granular, hard nature to it. You know, I felt it. And then she had something in her hairline that was really looking a little suspicious, even just for me, a blob that was raised, and it was dark, dark brown. We all get age spots as we get into our 50s and 60s, or many of us, if we're very fair-skinned, can see some discoloration. You know, I've got a couple from going out in the midday sun in Cape Town without my factor 50 on. I think it was about 4.5 minutes. And I've got these, you know, little, I don't know, age spots, turbulence on my cheeks here. But with her, I just said, you must go check that out.
Yes, we need to inspect everything from your head to your toes.
Yeah, and in part 2, we're going to get into how to conduct the self-exam, which is brilliant. So I also know that we went into chapter and verse about the care that I'm going to get. Now, instead of sampling, you know, doing a punch biopsy, they're going for an excision biopsy this coming Tuesday. And I understand you don't proceed that way. I mean, this is within the National Health Service here, the NHS. And that wouldn't be the way you might go initially. How would you do things?
Yes, when a patient presents with something suspicious, if it's a very small lesion, if it's 2 or 3, 4 millimeters, I find it absolutely acceptable to remove the entire thing and send it off for evaluation. When the area is larger, when the lesion is a little larger, I always prefer to do a biopsy. I would take 1 or 2 little punches in the areas that I see under the dermoscope, or even with my naked eye, the more irregular areas, and we will biopsy them and send them for evaluation. And based on those evaluations, we would know how to proceed. And that is standard of care where I'm practicing. A larger lesion, I don't know too many of my colleagues who would just remove a larger lesion with smaller margins, and then pending on that, go back and excise more with larger margins.
Well, mine's
But
13 millimeters. You know, the rubber end, a pencil eraser is what, 6 millimeters. This
yeah, five
blob
to
has
six.
been measured as 13 millimeters.
Right. So your particular growth is 13 millimeters, which is a little bit larger than the breadth of the width of your nail.
Yeah.
So if you kind of draw a line across your nail, that's about 10 to 12 millimeters. So your growth is a little bit larger than that. In really rare circumstances, would I ever excise the whole thing with small margins and then get it evaluated to decide where to go next? I'm sure there are reasons to do it. It's not how I practice. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just not what I would do.
But how quickly would you get the biopsy results back? Because I'm thinking within the NHS, I am so, again, comparatively, I am lucky because this is considered urgently needed surgery. And we just had a couple of days ago, the headline news was that there are record levels of a backlog for non-urgent
Yeah.
care within the
Yeah.
NHS, which, again, I was just counting my blessings and counting myself really lucky and feeling badly for everyone else because I'm getting sped through the system really impressively. And I've had 4 conversations with skin cancer specialists and honest to goodness, and they're biking over because I don't have a car now, a COVID test, PCR test, and I'll have to self-isolate for a few
Yeah.
days. So I feel like I'm the president, the prime minister, and the queen all in one. I can only say I'm getting amazing service from the NHS. But maybe why they do the excision is because, would you say maybe there'd be a lag time in getting the biopsy results? I mean, how quickly do you get them?
Yeah, perhaps in your case, I'm not familiar with NHS and their standards of care, and with COVID, I'm sure they've had to make some changes. With melanomas, we from a private pathologist, I use a skin pathologist. Um, Melanomas, we tend to get it back in a couple days. Sometimes I'll get a call 2 or 3 days later. COVID, it slowed things down a little bit because everybody was working virtually and everything slowed down a little bit. But I think pre-COVID, I was getting my melanoma reports certainly verbally in a couple days, and then in writing within a week.
Okay, well, I've looked on the NHS website, and I had a bajillion questions for the skin cancer guy, and that was one of the ones I didn't ask. But I found on the NHS website, likely 2 or 3 weeks. So that's maybe why they do it this way, because there is that built-in lag. So they take as much as they can, 13 millimeters apparently, and then they take a 2 millimeter margin. So it's an excision as opposed to what you were talking about, a punch biopsy in a couple
Right.
of places. So maybe that's the way. So at any rate, I'm really lucky to just get it done. But I will, I was talking to you and I find it fascinating because it's on the muscly part of my leg where there's a lot of tension. You were telling me you don't just take it out in a circle. Tell me about the actual procedure.
Yeah, so an excision is an elliptical shape of an American football. I say football, I know it's not a soccer ball. We distinguish, so I have to be clear. An elliptical is taking an ellipse. It's basically a shape of a football, and you surround the growth with an ellipse, and you remove the tissue within the ellipse, and then you're able to close it. A round circle, it's very difficult to pull the two sides of the skin together. It would have too much tension. So the general rule we teach the medical students is that the length of this suture of the elliptical should be about 3 to 3.5 times the width if you're just going to do a simple ellipse to be able to close it. Now on the calf or the meaty part of your leg, sometimes if you're in good shape, there is a lot of tension. There's not a lot of extra skin. So the 13 millimeter growth that you have is going to be almost a 40 centimeter length incision. I'm multiplying 13 by 3 and getting 39.
Wow, that's
Uh,
quite a big scar I'm going to have, like a
uh,
big vertical slash in my leg.
it's 4 centimeters if they're doing a simple ellipse to be able to close it with, easily without a lot of tension so they can keep it closed. There are other flaps and grafts they might be able to do, but again, that's dependent on what they find and the shape of your growth and how much tension you have in your skin.
The thing is, too, though, from what I gather, and from what you gather from, I know, thank you, you jumped on the NHS website as well as prep for this chat. They will go in, if it is malignant, they will then have a deeper excision and I'll have an even bigger scar. But, for me, I'm just lucky. Get it out. However it happens here, and for whatever reason, I'm really impressed with how I'm in the system now. But there won't be a scoop or an indentation, will there?
There shouldn't be an indentation because again, depending on the final result, how deep the tumor goes. But if it is melanoma and if it is limited to the skin, the excision should heal relatively flat if it's a long excision. But like you hit the nail on the head, you really want this out. Cosmetic concerns are definitely an issue, but when it comes to melanoma, your primary concern is removing it, because how well somebody does with melanoma really has to do with getting it off your body and removing
Yeah.
it from the skin in its totality.
And roughly, it's been 6 weeks since I saw it. In just a few days, I'm going in for this surgery and I'll have to self-isolate. So I just feel again, I'm overusing the word lucky, but I really do feel like, the high-vis character of mine. I've just been, lucky. Now, for the future, does one such growth mean I'm likely to have another?
Yes, having a melanoma does put you at increased risk of having another. But again, if you find it and you find it early, you will be fine. So you're going to be an educated consumer. You will likely do very well.
What do we all need to keep in mind if we're worried about anything that we see growing on our body?
Cancer is a scary diagnosis, but it is very curable if gotten early. And I always tell my patients, look for things. And what we teach our patients is to look for the signs that one of their moles is changing.
Self-examination. I did a little straw poll. Family, friends, no one's doing this. You mentioned monthly self-exams. Take us through what we all need to do to examine every little bit of our skin, the largest organ that we've got.
So again, I'm always asked, how do I know if I have skin cancer? And my answer is, you don't have to know. What you have to do is find the change. Susan, you were very fortunate. You found the change on your calf. You brought it to someone's attention. But if it's in an area, like you said, on the lower back, you may not find it unless you're looking for it. So I encourage all my patients to do a monthly self-exam. Pick the first day of the month, pick the day of your birth. If you're born on the 15th, do it every month on the 15th, but find a day in the month where you remember that you will be exposed in the privacy of your home, in your bathroom. You will have a little handheld mirror in hand, and you will look at your face, and you will look at your ears, you will look in your mouth, you will work down your neck, you will do your torso, your arms, you will look in your armpits, you will look at your legs between your toes. You will stand back to back to a mirror. You will hold the mirror up and you will look through the mirror to see if you can see your back. You can check your little girly parts or your little boy parts and literally look and make sure you don't find anything changing. And what's interesting is when you do look at yourself every month, you really will recognize what you look like normally. I compare it to looking in the stars. Everybody can recognize the Big Dipper. There are billions of stars out there, but yet you look up and you can see Orion and the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. You do that because your brain's amazing, and it remembers these images. By checking your skin once a month, you too will remember what you look like. And it's shocking to me how easy it is for people to say, geez, I don't think it did that. They know it's changed. And that's really key in finding cancers early.
I'm such a delinquent. I never do this. And quite honestly, anyone I ask, they're not doing it either. A couple of people said, yeah, I get a mole mapping session with my dermatologist once a year. Like clockwork, I put it in my diary. But these monthly exams, I think it's fantastic. You're saying pick a date that's important to you, schedule it in to your day.
Yes, and I should mention, when you wash your hair, because you really can't examine your scalp, when you wash your hair, feel around your scalp. Pick a day and just kind of feel around the scalp. See if you feel anything. Now, you won't get the ones that are very flat, but the minute it starts to elevate or change something, you will bring it to someone's attention. You can attempt to look in your scalp, especially if you're light-haired. That's very easy. Very difficult to do for a very dark-haired individual with a lot of hair. But you do the best you can. And get once a year, I do recommend annual exams by your dermatologist.
Yeah, and do them religiously. And I have to say, I think we're all a bit delinquent on this. Everyone I've talked to, nobody's doing it. So I think this is really, really useful reminder that, I've had the big reminder and I'm going to start doing it. But had this not happened, I wouldn't have given it a second. Even though, the love of my life died of melanoma, because his was hidden away and it must have been a very small splotch. I didn't spot it. He didn't spot it. And it went traveling, galloping up his spine and hitting vital organs. He was gone within 6 months. So we can't mess around with this stuff, can we?
No, not at all. I think really should be diligent, really diligent. Again, cancer is a scary diagnosis, but if found early, it is very treatable. Cancer kills when it's found late and it spreads. When you find it early and remove it, the prognosis is wonderful.
I think right now, though, in these times of pandemic, here in the UK and England, we're just coming out of our third significant lockdown. And many of us have the attitude I had when I noticed it. Oh, they're not going to have time to have a look at this. And I shouldn't be, intruding on the important time that all of the health professionals are devoting to the vaccine and all the rest. So, a lot of people might just think, I'll just ride this out. I'll delay getting in touch with my GP because they don't have time for me.
Yeah, the delay is not good. I'm seeing that in my office. People are still afraid to come out. We're at about 80% of our patient load, but people are coming in with cancers, but they're bigger. Where we used to see cancers averaging 5 millimeters to 10 millimeters, now they're averaging 10 millimeters to 15 millimeters. We're seeing much larger growths because people have been afraid and they have delayed diagnosis. So I encourage people not to do so.
Now, the need to get our daily doses of vitamin D, COVID has reinforced all of this. We need to get out in the sun and activate production of vitamin D. How do we balance the competing need for face to feet protection and sunscreen protection as well as examination against skin cancer?
Yes, vitamin D is important. I'm not going to tell anybody that they don't need vitamin D. When you look at the research, there is no good compelling science that shows the use of sunscreen and being sun smart is causing a vitamin D deficiency, number one. Number two, I encourage everybody to work with their GPs, get their vitamin Ds evaluated. And if you need vitamin D, well, we'll take a supplement. It makes perfect sense. I think it's a wonderful option. You can take fortified milk. There's plenty of ways, fish. There are plenty of ways you can get vitamin D. But the risks of doing so by getting ultraviolet radiation outweighs the benefits of getting your vitamin D that way. And so when sunscreen is used the way it's used, I can't tell you that vitamin D is that not getting sun is causing the vitamin D deficiency. There's just no evidence of that.
All right. So the message from you is slather on the at least factor 30 sunscreen. I mean, take us through what broad spectrum sunscreens mean, what we need to look out for on the bottle to know that it's going to be effective against ultraviolet light.
Right. So sunscreen is a product which is used to protect your skin from the ultraviolet rays from hitting your skin. And there's multiple kinds. There's the physical kinds, which act just like you're wearing a shirt. It reflects, the rays cannot penetrate. And then there's the chemical types, which absorb the ultraviolet light and create some sort of heat. They both work well at preventing the sun's rays from hitting the skin. The important part of sunscreen is using it. It's using it liberally, it's using it repetitively, applying it, and selecting a broad spectrum SPF 30 or higher sunscreen on a daily basis. Now, broad spectrum means it covers a wide range of ultraviolet light that the sun emits. So the sun emits long rays, we call those UVA rays. Those were classically rays that cause tanning. And the UVB rays, which cause burning. Broad spectrum sunscreens protect against both UVA and UVB rays. But I do have to say one thing about sunscreen before we go further. Sunscreen is not permission to be sitting in the sun. Sunscreen is to be used in addition to seeking shade, wearing long sleeves, wearing a 4-inch brimmed hat, avoiding the sun when it's the strongest, between 10 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's not permission. A lot of people think they have sunscreen on, they can go lie out at the beach. That's just a fallacy that if I have sunscreen on, I won't get burnt, because no sunscreen is 100% effective.
But surely we don't have to get to the point where every inch of our bodies that might be exposed, for wearing clothing, if we've got long, loose clothing on, we shouldn't go out and have our morning cup of coffee without first putting sunscreen on our hands, on the backs of our hands, as well as our face. I mean, we don't want to make everyone frightened of the sun, do we?
No, I don't think the fear is the issue, but I get up in the morning, brush my teeth. I do put my sunscreen on my face, my ears, and the back of my hands. Now, in the morning, the intensity of the sun it's not such that you're going to burn or get a lot. And remember, that sunscreen you're using is not 100%. So I am a proponent of wearing sunscreen on exposed skin, and I think you should expose as little of your skin as possible and put the sunscreen on. And yes, go outdoors and enjoy it. I'm not one to say live indoors in a bubble. That's just draconian, and nor is it rational. But I think being sun smart is applying sunscreen on exposed areas once you get up, and reapply it during the day. I'm a firm believer.
Yeah, again, straw poll, family, friends. All of the women I spoke to, I only spoke to women because the men weren't interested. But they were saying, I put it on my face religiously. Backs of hands, no. Ankles, lower legs. A lot of us are running around in athwear, always wearing our leggings around in order to have our little exercise snacks through the day. And I didn't find one person was putting it on their lower legs after they put their leggings on.
Right. No, I think we have to encourage people to use it more. And SPF should be 30 or higher. So SPF is sun protection factor. It's a number that tells us how well a product protects against the UVB rays, which are the burning rays. So the higher the number, the better the protection against the burn. It really doesn't tell you anything about the UVA portion of the ultraviolet radiation spectrum. So SPF 30 is adequate enough to prevent enough UVB rays, when applied appropriately, from burning the skin. People always ask me, is it the higher the number, the better? I think so. There was one study that did show a SPF of 100 was more effective at SPF of 50 from preventing a burn. And the reason for that may be that most people don't put on enough. So if you don't put on enough sunscreen, you're not going to get the protection that's listed on the label of the bottle. So when used in customary, the way that's customary used by the population, the higher the SPF studies show is probably more effective.
I think something that I was surprised to read, if I ever knew it, I'd forgotten, is that SPF 30, it's 97% protection. And then you go up to 50 and it's 98%. And then you go all the way to 100 and you're still only 98 and a bit percent. So there's not a huge gap between all of these different factors. You would think there'd be a big protection differential between 30 and 50, but there's not, right?
There's not. That's why I say SPF 30 or higher is adequate, but again, used appropriately, applied appropriately. And what we say a shot glass, which is 1 ounce, should cover a body in a bikini or an adult person. 1 shot glass, that's 1 ounce. Now, if you think that most sunscreens are only 5 or 6 ounces, and you're going to apply this every 2-3 hours if you're on the beach, you could easily go through 1 bottle of sunscreen a day. Yet people always ask me about my sunscreen that's 2 years old. I'm like, well, if it's 2 years old, you haven't been applying it appropriately, because it wouldn't last that long if you were applying it appropriately.
And what about product degradation? Because those of us who live in hot climates, when I was in Cape Town, I had my beach bag and I had lots of bottles of sunscreen with me, but I wasn't being so good about applying them after every dip in the ocean or in the pool. But I mean, if you've got an old bottle, just junk it. Is there a degradation that happens to the product?
Sure. Expiration dates are, I say, they're rules of thumb. They're formulated to last 3 years sitting in a cool place. If it's sitting on a hot windowsill, it could degrade faster, or in a hot car, versus if it's sitting in a nice cool bag in a bag somewhere. But again, to my point, if you're wearing sunscreen every day on your face and back of your hands, and when you're outdoors, which now includes your arms and your legs, that sunscreen is not going to last you 2 or 3 years. You will go through it much faster. So I challenge every person out there to beat the expiration date. Use that sunscreen bottle up way before the expiration date is, and it never becomes an issue.
And I was surprised to read that melanomas can manifest themselves on the undersides of feet. So when you're out at the beach, under an umbrella with your wide brimmed hat, are you putting it on the undersides of your feet as well?
If it's not exposed, the answer is no. I don't believe you need to put it on the undersides of your feet. There's no exposure there. Melanoma is an interesting tumor in that it can really occur anywhere. Basal cells and squamous cells love to occur in sun-exposed areas. Melanomas have a more indirect relationship where they occur in blondes. The closer to the equator you move, you have higher melanoma, but it's not necessarily that they occur in sun-exposed areas.
Okay, because
So,
I always think when I'm out in the sun reading a book on a towel or something in my backyard with my hat on, I'm always lying on my stomach with my feet up. So they're getting sun. So I guess for me, it depends on your habits.
yes, if you're getting sun there, then sunscreen should be on.
Yeah. Now, what about sunblock?
Sunblock is a term that implied it was 100% block. The FDA here in the United States has now not allowed that terminology on the bottles any longer because nothing's 100%. There is no sunblock. So that's sort of an old term. We don't really use sunblock anymore. Some people equate it with the use of sunscreens that have titanium and zinc oxide in them. Those are the physical mineral sunscreens. But even those are not 100%. So it's an old term that is still out there and being used, but not totally accurate.
And what about the ingredients that we need to look for? Zinc and chemical, mineral. What are the different types of sunscreen? And should we stick with the big brands? A lot of people might be looking for budget options, a lot joblessness through the pandemic. What do we need to see on the bottles in the United States and across Europe?
Okay, so that's a great question. I am a firm believer in purchasing products from major manufacturers, not because products from non-major manufacturers are inadequate, but the big manufacturers have the resources for testing. They have reputations at stake, which if they look what's happening with J&J and the baby powder talc issue, right? They have reputations at stake that will cost them billions and billions. So I am a firm believer that the major manufacturers are the way to go. And they're usually also the more cost effective, not always, but usually the more cost effective. So that's why I'm a huge advocate of that. In the United States, we look for 30 or higher. We look for broad spectrum, which again implies that the UVA and UVB rays are protected. We look for water resistant. In the United States, water resistant, they test whether it's still effective, a sunscreen, when you immerse for about 40 minutes. There's also an 80-minute test, but 40 minutes is the minimum. In Europe, I believe you have the star system. You have a 5-star system. So a 4 or 5-star system, that basically tells you that the ratio of UVA to UVB protection is adequate. So if you have a low SPF in Europe, let's say you only have an SPF of 10 and a high star, that's not good enough. You really need an SPF of 30 or higher, which is telling you about the UVB rays, and then a 4 or 5-star, which would tell you it's also broad spectrum.
So for us living in Europe, and maybe farther afield, I mean, this podcast goes to 130 odd countries, but the major manufacturers, they are marketing everywhere. I looked at the back of my Made in Germany Amber Solaire product that I've been using, and it's only got 3 stars. I was quite surprised. It's factor 50 for very fair skin, cha-cha, but it's only got 3 stars. So I need to get something stronger.
Yes, I would get a 4 or a 5. That tells you that is you're getting more of the UVA protection compared to the UVB protection. So in the UK, I would definitely look for a 4 or 5-star in addition to that high SPF that you selected, which was a good choice.
Okay. Now, what about natural options, things without active chemical or mineral ingredients from the major makers of these sunscreens?
Unfortunately, I have yet to find a quote unquote homemade natural version of any sunscreen that can protect the skin at the levels that these approved filters. In the United States has 17. I believe Europe has 31 approved filters. I haven't found one natural made product that protects the way that these others protect. So I err on the side of caution and say, stick with the ones that are there. When used in a customary fashion, they're all deemed safe. Yes, we are doing some more studies, and we should do more studies on the safety of ingredients. But again, you can limit your amount of exposure by covering up, right? Clothes is a much more effective sunscreen than the sunscreen itself on skin. So minimize how much sunscreen you need by wearing more clothes, avoiding the midday sun. Apply the sunscreens from these major manufacturers, whether it's in Europe or in the United States, and you will minimize your risk of skin cancer and increase your risk of staying healthy.
All right, fantastic. Well, I guess the bottom line then, you've just summed up everything. Wear factor 30, Make sure you go for 4 or 5 stars in the UK and similar in the United States. And not just on your face, but everywhere your skin is going to be exposed to the sun. And then get the mirror out and do that monthly self-examination. I think we're all going to be having to adopt that habit. Yes.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be a choice. If people get up in the morning and they brush their teeth, they don't say, I think I'm going to brush my teeth today. They just do it. And that's what I'd like to see people do with sunscreen. Just get up in the morning, brush your teeth, and put your sunscreen on. Don't make it a decision. Just do it.
Yeah, and I guess for us women too, we can put it, if we've got some sort of BB cream or something, we can put it in with that, and all in one go, we can, I've got these 2 blobs they came with age, they came with maybe sun exposure in Cape Town, but I'm always feeling I want to cover them up because they're just very thin age spots or sunspots. So I could
Sunspot.
mix them up with the BB cream and get it on my face in one go, and then go outside and have my coffee and not worry so much if everything else is covered up.
Yes, you can use BB cream or CC cream. Many of them have sunscreens in them, but do remember that a lot of moisturizers with sunscreen in them are not as water resistant. So if it's a hot day and you're running your errands, you could sweat that sunscreen right off, which is why I like to encourage people to wear the real sunscreen that's water resistant. It lasts a lot longer. And not that you shouldn't reapply it, you should, but you're less likely to when you're running around in the middle of the day. People aren't going to necessarily stop to apply their sunscreen again, which means to me, using a sunscreen makes more sense than just a moisturizer with sunscreen in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we can direct people to your skincare education hub, fryface.com, and your amazing product selector tool. These are all products that you have vetted. You're not getting anything from the manufacturers, and people can go there and put in their various criteria. Tell us how it works.
Yeah, very simply, we have a database of wonderful skincare products, all by reputable skincare companies. And the user comes in and selects what they're looking for, moisturizer, cleanser, sunscreen, and they can identify them, what part of the body they want to use it on. They can identify themselves if they have eczema or acne, and if they select these products that are selected for them avoid ingredients which they shouldn't come in contact with. You can select for your favorite dispenser. Some people like a pump, some people like a jar. It is all personal preference, and the database allows you to make that selection as well.
Hey, I hope you found that useful. And a heads up about next week, Dr. Frey is coming back. She's written a book called The Skincare Hoax, and we're going to dig into all of that. I'm Susan Flory for now. Thanks so much for your reviews, for your donations, and we'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.